So this is in fact the fourth and the last session of the discursive program on post-secularism, organized by BAC in partnership with the Center for Humanities of the Utrecht University, which is in its turn one of the three legs of a wider long-term project developed by BAC, the Return of Religion and Other Myths, which consists of this program, which also has its components that are more closely developed by the Center for Humanities in the frame of the university, and an exhibition, which I hope you've all seen it, because today is its last day, and we don't want to send you from the conference to see the exhibition. The exhibition is it's called The Art of Iconoclasm. It's curated by Sven Lüttiken, and was on show, or is on show, at BAC and at the Central Museum. And the last component of this project will be a critical reader that will be available this autumn. So there will be this sort of like continuation that we're inviting you to follow. The Return of Religion and Other Myths basically continues BAC's engagement with issues and questions that are of wide relevance for contemporary culture and society, but also its methodology of submitting questions of this scale and of these depths to a thorough process of investigation and of research, many times in a sort of collaborative manner with partners coming from different methodological backgrounds, spanning from academia and its specific tools to the art field. Now, the question of religion in contemporary societies is often addressed as a return, as a revival, as a surge of sorts. But I mean, a revival that has that is understood to have varied and different consequences on a public sphere that is traditionally defined as in a secular way. Now, while such transformative processes can be observed on several levels, cultural, political, and so on, this presence of religion is often instrumentalized in many discussions, often as a threat, and often in connection with other discussions related to terrorism, cultural clashes, and other political international issues. Now, more than being strictly a critical observation about today's society, this desecularization, the secularization of the public sphere that one can observe both in, let's say, Western societies, but also in parts of the Middle East or parts of the Indian subcontinent that have undergone processes of secularization previously in the last decades. But more than being just a critical observation, it has become a sort of widely held popular assumption, a sort of received knowledge that follows somehow the pattern of a myth, of many contemporary myths. It is exactly in this area of the construction of these myths, as well as in the function that art, with its sort of discussions about representation and other sort of like critical position, that this project intends to function and intends to sort of like set its ideas in a modest and humble way. And yeah, today's session should be one small contribution in this field. I will not go on for very long. I will invite Sven very soon to introduce today's speakers and give more details about his involvement in the project.
Thanks, Cosmin. Just a few words before our first speaker takes up his position here. So today's session is titled Alternatives to Monotheism. This entire project, of course, was very much focused on the, let's say, afterlife of monotheism in the apparently increasingly secularized modernity, and then the apparent resurgence, revival of monotheism in the last few years. We've dealt with very complex processes of transformation, of continuity and change in this project. Various speakers, for instance, in this lecture series have argued that there are strong monotheistic elements even in apparently purely secular contexts, artistic and theoretical, philosophical, political contexts in modernity. And conversely, that in the apparent revival of monotheism in the form of various fundamentalist movements in the present, there are traces actually of secularization. So in some ways, contemporary monotheism, especially its fundamentalist variety, shows traces of secularization, and it also shows traces of various alternative forms of religion that have emerged in the West in the past century or so. It shows traces more specifically of the appearance of a form of a la carte religiosity in the 1960s, the appearance of of forms of spirituality that is not necessarily linked to traditional beliefs and churches and rituals anymore. So already we have touched upon this relationship of monotheism and other forms of religion or religiosity, spirituality, and this is something that we want to explore a bit further today. So we want to focus on alternatives to, but maybe also to a certain extent alternatives within monotheism, because while various modern esoteric and occult movements react to the dominant form or forms of especially Christian religion, they are nonetheless formed and informed by this Christian religion, and at least in the beginning they often emerge from this religion itself. This is something that our first speaker, Wouter Hanegraaf, one of the main experts on the Western esoteric tradition, will deal with in his first lecture. So you will be slightly surprised, perhaps, that at this session, which purportedly deals with alternatives to monotheism, Wouter Hanegraaf will start with a lecture with a PowerPoint that has the word idolatry written on the screen. So he links his discussion of Western esoteric movements back to the monotheistic tradition, and especially the monotheistic concept of idolatry and the monotheistic conceptualization of paganism. After that, Lars Bang Larsen, the Danish critic and writer, will talk about forms of alternative forms of spirituality in the 1950s, 60s and 70s in relation to avant-garde art and film practice from that era. And he will focus on vibrations. After that there will be a short break, and then we will have a double film screening that will be introduced by Marco Pasi from the University of Amsterdam. Well, that's after the break. Now I would like to welcome Wouter Hanegraaf.